Hail, adventurer! Welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 build. I'm Myotis, and I'm going to walk you through this darkness-based Beastmaster Ranger build. Now, the scaling of a Beastmaster Ranger is really dependent on taking Ranger levels. Your Beast Companion and its last most important ability scale up to level 11, so we have to take at least that many Ranger levels. But we do have a couple of choices for that 12th level. At level 11, the Dire Raven Companion gains an ability that lets it spread clouds of darkness as it lands from flight. So in the first round of combat, you can have the Raven dash, and then do small flying hops around the battlefield, covering your party and all your enemies in 3 turns of darkness. This blinds everyone inside, but the Raven has immunity to blindness, and you can get it through itemization. You'll have advantage on attacks against blinded creatures, and they'll have disadvantage on attacks against you, and their ranged options will be limited to the 10 feet surrounding them. But you'll be free to pepper them with an arsenal of special arrows, bringing a variety of tools to help solve any encounter. And although the Raven's ability to spread darkness doesn't come until level 11, it has an attack that causes blindness without the enemy having to fail the saving throw. This will carry you through the early game. Even the fine familiar Raven's blinding attack is capable of doing this, and really did a lot to help me through my first honor mode playthrough. But the Beastmaster's Dire Raven has a lot more hit points and AC, and you'll get a lot more mileage out of it as the Raven scales when you level up. You might feel a slight struggle for this character in the mid game, but once you get into Act 3 and hit level 11, the widespread darkness that you can put out will make this one of the strongest members of your team. So let's talk about how to build them. I think this fits best on an Origin or party member Astarion. The darkness theme really lends to his past stalking the night, but I think it could fit equally well on a Dark Justicia or Shadowheart. Her Spear of Evening would even grant easy access to casting darkness prior to level 11. And of course, you could play this as a Dark Urge or a Tav. If I was going to pick a custom race, I think that Asmodeus Tiefling or Drow are the most obvious choices, since they gain the racial feature to cast the darkness spell once per day. Wood Elf is also always a good choice for the movement speed. Githyanki have really strong features with Astral Knowledge and Misty Step. Dwagar are also a good choice because of their at-will invisibility, and the Halfling Luck feature is one of the best in the game. Avoiding most of the critical failures you would normally roll can't really be understated, but I think I'd probably build this as a Drow. I think it feels the best thematically. For the purposes of this video though, I'm going to build it out for Astarion. He's a High Elf, and so gets 1 Wizard cantrip. This character isn't going to have high intelligence, which is what the High Elf cantrip scales off of, so I wouldn't take any of these attacking cantrips. I'd probably take either Minor Illusion to help group up enemies, Blade Ward to precast before some fights for a little tankiness, or Friends to smooth out dialogue, since we're not going to have a high charisma stat either. If Astarion is just your party member, he'll have Firebolt. It won't be good as an attack, but it's not useless to be able to just set things on fire. But as Origin Astarion, I think I might take Minor Illusion. A lot of special arrows have an area of effect, so grouping up enemies can be really helpful before starting combat. Astarion has a Charlatan background, which grants him Deception and Sleight of Hand. This character can be your lockpicker, but doesn't necessarily have to be. Otherwise, we will want to get the rest of the dexterity skills, since we're going to be maxing out our dexterity score. If I was building a custom character, I'd consider taking Urchin for Sleight of Hand and Stealth, or Folk Hero for Animal Handling and Survival. We'll have an okay Wisdom score. I think these are really thematic skills for a Ranger to have, although the go-to background would probably be Outlander, which grants you athletics and survival. Again, survival is really thematic for a ranger, and athletics can stop us from getting shoved, but so will acrobatics, and we're going to have a higher dexterity score, so we kind of want that instead, but we can get some of this stuff from the ranger skill list. Of course, as Astarion, I'll be a charlatan. Now, when you start up a new game, you can't change the Origin character's starting class, so let's go see Withers to rectify that. So naturally, we're going to be starting as a ranger. We've got 11 levels to get through, so better to start early. As a ranger, we get to pick our favorite enemy and natural explorer. I think our best favorite enemy choices at level 1 are Ranger Knight for proficiency in history and heavy armor. We'll tend to prefer medium armor, but this can help you get some extra AC in the early game, and Grimm's helmet is a good fit for a ranger. The other good choice is Bounty Hunter. This gives us proficiency in investigation, and creatures we hit with ensnaring strike have disadvantage on their saving throw. But rangers have a kind of limited spell selection, and your beast companion actually gains benefits from Hunter's Mark, so we're usually going to be concentrating on that. I'm probably not even going to take ensnaring strike at level 1, so I think you're better to go with Ranger Knight. Then for natural explorer, if you want this character to be your lockpicker and trap disarmer, you'll go with Urban Tracker for the proficiency in sleight of hand, unless you get it from your background like Astarion does. You could take Beast Tamer for an extra small summon, but I don't really think that's necessary with the beast. You're probably better to get the defensive options with all of these resistances, and fire is the best choice to start with. This will give you resistance to fire surfaces, fire arrows from enemies, a lot of explosives, and all fire magic. I think it's a little more common than cold and poison. There's at least a few enemies that do poison damage, but there's also other ways to get resistance to poison damage pretty easily. So I think Wasteland Wanderer Fire is the right choice. For our abilities, we're gonna clear out this trash. We definitely want this +2 in dexterity, but I'm gonna move this +1 up to constitution. Wisdom affects a lot of our spells, but most of the spells we're going to take are kind of utility based and don't actually require our wisdom score. So we're really gonna have it more for a few skill checks. Naturally, we're gonna max out our dexterity. If you're planning on giving this character the hag's hair, you definitely want this uneven 17 score so you can easily get it up to 18. If you're not, then the 16 is fine to start with, but I think I'm gonna take a feat for +1 to dexterity at level 4. So I'm going to keep mine at 17. Then we're going to pump our constitution up to 16. This will help us maintain concentration in spells and just have a healthy pool of hit points. We don't need intelligence or charisma, so we can use most of the rest of our points to bring our wisdom up to 14. Then with our final 2 points, I'm going to actually put strength up to 10. This way it's just a little bit easier to jump to places in the environment. Then finally at level 1, we're picking our proficiencies. We already have sleight of hand and deception from the charlatan background. We have history from Ranger Knight and perception from being a high elf. So I want to make sure I've grabbed survival and stealth. Both of these will probably come up on occasion. And then nature I don't think is particularly useful. There are just so few nature checks in this game. I'm not sure why investigation is looking like it's checked here, even though it's not, but it could be a good choice. We'd take acrobatics if we could, but I think we're better to stay with the wisdom skills since we have a small bonus to them. I'd probably take insight, especially if this is your main character doing most of the dialogue checks, but you could take animal handling if you want to roleplay being good with animals. You're just usually better to drink animal speaking potions. So I'm going to take insight. I'll lock those in and move on to level 2. We get our first ranger spells at this level. If you took Bounty Hunter at level 1, you're definitely taking Ensnaring Strike, but I think the Beastmaster is better off taking Hunter's Mark. The additional damage is actually really good in the early game, and unlike Ensnaring Strike, one casting of this could actually last until your long rest, assuming you can maintain concentration. Then this is one of the better characters to get Long Strider on. I think a Ranger is better taking some utility spells to free up the spells known of the pure spellcasters in your party. You could take Animal Speaking if you want to talk to a lot of animals, or Cure Wounds or Goodberry if you want a little bit of side healing. Hail of Thorns is unfortunately quite bad, and I think we might be taking Fog Cloud at our next level. With those spells chosen, we also get a fighting style. Definitely going to lean into archery here, so we're going to take the archery fighting style. The +2 to ranged attack rolls is actually a really big bonus, and will help offset sharpshooter later down the line. On to level 3. We get one more spell here, and I think I'm going to take Fog Cloud. It can help simulate the effects of darkness in the first 2 acts of the game, potentially blinding enemies you cast it over. And this is where we get our subclass. We're going to be going Beastmaster for the Ranger's Companion, and we're pretty exclusively going to be using the Dire Raven. Even in these early levels before gaining access to the darkness ability, the Raven's blinding attack will be absolutely devastating to enemies. You could replace the spell here as well, but I don't think I'm going to. Just going to go to level 4. Again, not going to replace the spell, but we do get a feat. If you either kept your dexterity at 16 or have an 18 because you just love munching on some hair, you'll definitely be taking ability improvement and putting both points into dexterity. You could take alert if you really want the initiative, but we're already going to have a high dexterity, so I'm not really sure that this character needs it as much as others. And if you're good at balancing your hit chance, you could take sharpshooter this early. But I think for most people, you're better to just improve your dexterity. And since I have that uneven score, I'm going to take athlete. This will bring my dexterity up to an 18. We'll only use 1.5 meters or 5 feet of movement to get up from prone, and this will further increase our jump distance, which can be handy in and out of combat. The most important thing though is that +1 to our dexterity. And then we'll go to level 5. This is a really big level for Rangers, and probably our last really important power spike before we hit level 11. We'll get level 2 spell slots and spells here, extra attack, and our companion now adds a proficiency bonus to its armor class and damage rolls, which at level 3 is a +3. Rangers have kind of a poor selection, unfortunately. If you find you're stealthing a lot, you could take Pass Without a Trace. Protection from poison can be good in some encounters. Lesser restoration can be helpful for a little bit of support. Paralysis especially is a really bad condition, and you want to cure it as soon as you can. You could take Dark Vision if you're a race that doesn't have inherent dark vision, but ideally you don't have to do that. Our actual best choice here I think is Spike Growth. This will help us lock down and damage enemies, and especially once we get our darkness combos going, Spike Growth will actually combo really well with it. I still don't think I'm going to replace one of my 3 decent spells here, so we'll go to level 6. Here we get another favorite enemy in Natural Explorer. You could get Bounty Hunter here if you want to start playing around with Ensnaring Strike, but I think we just have better stuff to be concentrating on. The rest of these options aren't much better, but we'll probably take Keeper of the Veil for proficiency in Arcana and for the spell protection from evil and good. You're not going to be casting this much, but when you do, it should have a big impact. There are at least some of these creature types in each act of the game. Now for our Natural Explorer, if you didn't already take Wasteland Wanderer Fire, you'll probably pick it here. Since I still don't really want Beast Tamer or Urban Tracker, I'll take Wasteland Wanderer Poison. I just don't think think cold damage is very common in enemies in this game. But if I didn't already have sleight of hand proficiency from my background, I definitely would have already had Urban Tracker. But I do, so Wasteland Wanderer Poison it is. And I'm still not going to replace any spells. So we'll do level 7. Now our companion can dash, disengage, and help as a bonus action. Your companion is actually one of the only ways in the game to get help as a bonus action. It doesn't come up much, but it's nice to have when it does. And that bonus action dash is going to be really useful once our Dire Raven is spreading darkness everywhere. We also get another spell. Might take Lesser Restoration here just as a nice to have, or even maybe Enhanced Leap. There's no particular standout in this available list, so you just kind of pick what works for you. You could even experiment with something and then switch it out at a later level. But let's move on to level 8. Here we're no longer affected by difficult terrain. You could replace a spell if you want to, but most importantly we get our second feat. At this point I'm definitely going to take Sharpshooter. You could already have 20 dexterity here, but even if you don't, the damage increase from Sharpshooter and the ability to ignore high ground rules is just too good to ignore. At this point we may have a half decent magic bow and other equipment that can help improve our hit chance. So the -5 penalty to attack rolls is pretty negligible at this point. And then we can go to level 9. Here we get 3rd level spells. There's only a couple of options. Conjure Barrage just doesn't really do enough damage to be worth it. Daylight is a nice spell to have, but if you have a cleric or someone that can easily prepare it, you probably don't need to take it on this ranger. Lightning Arrow, like Conjure Barrage, doesn't really do enough damage, but if you really need some lightning damage, then you could take it. Plant Growth I think is our best level 3 spell. Much like Spike Growth, it'll work really well with the Darkness plan. Quartering an enemy's movement while they're blinded in a cloud of darkness will make it basically impossible for them to escape. They'll all be sitting ducks while you pepper them with arrows. And it doesn't require concentration, so you can pair it with Spike Growth or Hunter's Mark. Protection from energy can be kind of useful to have, but you're already going to have resistance to some of those damages. I'd pick it up at a later level if you really want it. And level 10. So close to that 11 power spike. Here we get Hide in Plain Sight, so if you stand still you can become invisible, get a +10 to stealth checks. It's almost never that it's going to be useful to be invisible without moving. We also get our 3rd favorite enemy in Natural Explorer. I still haven't taken Ensnaring Strike, so Bounty Hunter is not good for us. You can either take Mage Breaker or Sanctified Stalker. We already have proficiency in Arcana, and True Strike is just awful, so we'll take Sanctified Stalker here just because it's the only other option. Then for Natural Explorer, we can finally take Wasteland Wanderer Cold and gain resistance to our 3rd damage type. At this point you'll probably know if you have a spell you're not really using and you might want to swap it out for something else. I think I still like the choices so far. So now we're level 11. This is where it all comes together, baby. Our beast now has extra attack, so between us and the beast we're making 4 attacks per turn, although the beast's attacks are much worse than ours. But most importantly, the Dire Raven will get access to darkness. Flying is a free action limited only by movement, so you can do it multiple times on each of the Raven's turns and just engulf the field with darkness. At this point it'll also have its Cursed Omen attack, which is a ranged attack that grants allies advantage on attacks against the target, but it kind of doesn't work well in the darkness. You can't seem to target enemies. I'm not sure why, it seems like a bug to me, but at this point the Raven is really just here as a darkness stick anyway. You can also summon 2 Raven allies, but you don't actually have control over the Ravens, so mostly they'll just fly up and get themselves killed pretty quickly, but they can be a helpful distraction. We also get another spell. Here I might take Daylight for a particular Act 3 encounter, but if you already have it somewhere else, you could take Protection from Energy here. Maybe you took Bounty Hunter before and you really want to try out Ensnaring Strike. Maybe you want Pass Without a Trace to stealth through some encounters. Enhanced Leap is a fine choice too, although kind of late to be getting it at this point. I'll probably stick with Daylight, but there's not like a horrible choice here. It's kind of whatever you think will help your party out. Now at level 12, we have a couple of choices. We don't really gain much as a ranger outside of our feet, so if you don't have 20 dexterity, you could pump it up to 20 now. You could take Alert or Lucky. I'm not sure that any of this is particularly useful. I'd probably recommend a 1-level multi-class dip. There are 2 good options for us. The first would be a level of Rogue. This will grant you 1d6 of extra damage every turn. Since we're often going to have advantage against enemies because of the darkness, you don't even really have to think about getting the extra sneak attack damage off, you almost always will. It's not much, but a little bit can go a long way. You also get an extra skill and expertise in 2 skills. So you can take acrobatics here, and maybe put expertise into perception and sleight of hand if this is your lockpicker. In fact, if this character is going to be your main lockpicker, this is probably the build I would suggest, and I'd actually take that 1 level of rogue at your first level, and then take the other 11 as ranger. Personally, I hate failing lockpicking and trap disarming, so I try to always have a character in my party that has expertise in sleight of hand, but that's just me. But if you're looking for pure power, what you actually probably want is the level of Cleric. Cleric is arguably the best 1-level dip in the game. We get some of the best cantrips, and I'd probably be taking Guidance. Even if you already have another character with Guidance, it's just super handy to have it on multiple characters. That 1d4 to any ability check will get you through most of the ability checks in the game. Resistance is also handy to have. This is the same as Guidance but for saving throws. It won't come up nearly as often, but if you do encounter a saving throw in dialogue or something, it's really nice to have. Finally, I'd probably take Blade Ward. You won't cast it much, but you could do it before starting a combat, just for a little extra tankiness. Otherwise, you could take Thaumaturgy if this is your main character and you're making a lot of dialogue checks. Then for our subclass, we're going to take War Domain. This will let us make an attack as a bonus action 3 times per day. The one problem that the Beastmaster Ranger has is that since all of our subclass features are focused around our companion, the Ranger themselves can feel a little bit lackluster sometimes. So this situational extra attack will really help boost our early combat burst damage. Pick the deity of your choice. I'm not sure if any of these particularly suit Astarion. Maybe you'll pick Lathander after you picked up his mace, or maybe Elistray because of Astarion's newfound freedom, or Maleki since you're a ranger and maybe care about the forests. I'm sure I said some of those names wrong, but choose whatever suits your roleplay. Then we also get to prepare some spells. I wouldn't take anything that really requires your wisdom, even though we do have a little bit of wisdom. You probably want Bless, Healing Word, and either Sanctuary or Create or Destroy Water. Sanctuary is kind of nice to cast on your Dire Raven, so they can fly around the battlefield with impunity. This is probably your best option unless you want your character to be really good at sleight of hand. If you went melee instead of ranged, maybe you could take 1 level of Barbarian for that extra ranged damage. You just wouldn't be concentrating on any spells when you rage. So you'd kind of pick and choose which battles require Hunter's Mark versus which battles require raging. But I like a bow-based ranger, so let's get into equipment. So let's start with Act 1 gear. The most important tool for any archer is going to be their bow. Almost any bow will do. There's a lot of great ones in the game, but specifically you're probably either going to want the Jolt Shooter because lightning charges are really good, especially if you took Sharpshooter early, and you can even build around that as a mechanic in the early game. Or if you want to use some sort of item to increase your base strength, you'd probably go with the Titan String Bow. If you have enough Giant Strength elixirs, or use an item like the Club of Hill Giant Strength, then this bow can actually last you right up until the end of Act 3. But if you'd rather just rely on dexterity, then I'd probably go with the Jolt Shooter. One of the best rings for any weapon user in Act 1 is the Caustic Band, although since your power is going to be split between you and your animal companion, this might be better suited to another martial character. The Gloves of Archery are probably your best in slot handwear, just a +2 damage to all of your ranged weapon attacks. And for boots, you're either going to want the Disintegrating Nightwalkers or Boots of Striding. I think these are 2 of the best boots in the game, so it depends what your other party members want as well. But since we don't otherwise have access to Misty Step, the once per short rest casting of it on this character is really helpful, as well as being able to ignore most surfaces. Or since we'll be concentrating on spells like Spike Growth and Hunter's Mark, the Boots of Striding giving us momentum and immunity to prone and being moved against our will can help prevent losing that concentration. Probably the best melee weapon to pick up in this act is the Knife of the Undermountain King. The improved critical hit chance and re-rolling of damage die will still apply to your ranged weapon attacks. This character is also actually a good candidate for hand crossbows. And for a little extra damage, you might want Broodmother's Revenge. For your armor slot, you could consider the Graceful Cloth. That +2 to dexterity will get you to 20 a lot easier, and advantage on all dexterity skill checks is just so good. It's hard to ignore how powerful those are, but since this is clothing and not actually armor, it will drastically reduce your armor class. So you probably either want to wield a shield or have another character cast mage armor on you. Alternatively, the best medium armor for you is the Adamantian version, but since we took Ranger Knight, you could also use the heavy armor version. Basically whatever gives you the highest AC. That is at least until we hit Act 2 and can get the Yuntai Scale Mail. Any of the armors with exotic material that let you add your full dexterity modifier to your armor class, on top of the already decent base AC of medium armors, is absolutely busted. If you have a high dexterity score, you always want one of these exotic material armors on your character. And this just happens to be the first one we come across. In Act 2, we'll also find the Eversight Ring, which is the first way that we'll be able to gain access to blinded immunity. If you want to do a darkness build, you want to be able to get an entire party with that immunity, but most importantly on yourself. There are a couple of different item options in Act 3, but the Eversight Ring is the first one we'll come across. You'll also find Killer's Sweetheart here. The Ranger likes to add on-hit effects to their weapon attacks through itemization and with Hunter's Mark, so they get a lot of added damage if you can easily critical hit. It's also why we'll want the Covert Cowl. Standing in fog cloud or darkness will obscure you, so it's very easy to get that increased critical hit chance. And since it's easy to critical hit, we can also get the Surgeon's Subjugation Amulet. Paralyzing a problematic boss, thanks to a well-timed critical hit, will just on-the-spot win encounters for you. You might also consider equipping the Sentinel Shield in this act for the added initiative bonus to make sure you're going first every combat. Unfortunately, there's not really a way to improve the initiative of your animal companion, but you can at least start setting up your crowd control early with things like Spike Growth or Plant Growth. And if you find that you're mostly using Hunter's Mark, then the Circlet of Hunting can also be useful, especially if you want a different character to be stacking critical hit chance. Then in in Act 3 you can potentially replace the Eversight ring with either the Helldusk helmet or the Steel Watcher helmet. Both make it so that you can't be blinded, and with a few different sources of blindness immunity, your whole party should be able to see through your darkness clouds. But if you want to keep the Eversight ring on this character, then you can probably upgrade your helmet to Savarok's Horned Helmet for the unrestricted critical hit chance. The best exotic material armor is probably the Armor of Agility, since it also gives you +2 to saving throws, and you can consider upgrading your handwear to the Legacy of the Masters. This gives you a +2 to your attack and damage rolls with weapons, so it's a little better than the Gloves of Archery. Towards the end of the game, your best melee options are probably Crimson Mischief and Bloodthirst, although I think you want Bloodthirst in your offhand for the +1 to AC. Most of the endgame bows are good. The strongest is probably Deadshot for the critical hit chance and adding your proficiency bonus a second time to your attack rolls, so that you basically will never miss, even with Sharpshooter activated. But I think Gaunter Mail, letting you cast Haste, is pretty good, and I think Blightbringer is a little bit underrated. If you're already stacking a bunch of critical hit chance, then you can debilitate enemies with the slowed condition, especially good with the many target arrows. The last items you could consider are the Ballast Armor and the Assassin of Ball Cowl. If you go a route that unlocks that for you, you'll be quite safe in your darkness clouds, so even as a ranged character, you can actually get close enough to enemies to activate the Aura of Murder. You actually have a lot of great gear combination options. Obviously, stacking critical hit chance and additions to your base attack and damage rolls are good, but you could also target your bow with the Drake Throat Glaive to grant it thunder damage, and equip the Gloves of Belligerent Skies and Ring of Spiteful Thunder. This will apply Reverberation and the Dazed Condition to any enemy you hit, giving them a -1 to Strength, Constitution, and Dexterity saving throws for each stack of Reverberation, and disadvantage on Wisdom saving throws from Dazed. Or since you'll always be concentrating on a spell, you can equip the Strange Conduit Ring to add psychic damage to your attacks, and the Brain Drain Gloves to apply mental fatigue every time you deal psychic damage, giving enemies a -1 to Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throws for each stack. You can become a powerhouse for applying conditions on the battlefield. The last thing I like to talk about in these videos is your team composition. This Beastmaster Ranger wants to do two things: cover the arena in darkness and trap enemies in that darkness. So a Warlock, or a character with a slight dip in Warlock for Devil's Sight, allowing them to see through magical darkness, pairs perfectly with this character, especially with Repelling Blast on Eldritch Blast, letting the Warlock push enemies into the darkness if they either didn't start their turn there or moved out of it. This build also pairs well with Hunger of Hadar, as an additional way to lock down the battlefield and blind enemies. You also want to lock enemies inside your darkness, which the Frighten condition is perfect for, and the Great Old One Warlock can easily apply with critical hits. Having other characters that stack Reverberation can also help knock enemies prone so they have a harder time moving. Same with the Battlemaster's Trip Attack, and the ability for a Tiger Barbarian to maim enemies, reducing their movement to 0, will make it so that no one can escape your traps. Finally, any character wielding Shar's Spear of Evening can help supplement the darkness spread by a Raven, since a character wielding the spear can cast darkness at will. It's also another way to gain immunity to blindness. But that's it for our Beastmaster Ranger. You want to cover the field in darkness and trap enemies inside it. It can make any fight feel really one-sided in your favor. It also pairs nicely with last week's video, the Shadow Step Monk. Weird how that is. Almost like the next couple of videos in a row are all going to be builds that synergize well together. So you better subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to see when those videos go live, and build a whole darkness party of your own. So until the next video, happy hunting.